Hello, my name is Miriam Udel, and I am Associate Professor of German Studies and Jewish Studies at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, and a member of the Advanced Kollel program at Yeshivat Maharat. I am delighted to be here with you for the inaugural International Women's Talmud Day on Sunday, May 13th, 2018, co-sponsored by JOFA UK, Yeshivat Maharat, and Darchei Noam. Today we're going to be looking at a suite of texts from Tractate Ketubot, from Tractate Ketubot, that discuss the implications of intensive long-term Torah study, specifically situations where a husband, and in some cases father, leaves his family to study Torah in distant yeshivot over long periods of time. I chose this material for today because it grapples in a very real way with the costs of intensive Torah study, with the impact on family life, and in a world where men were exclusively the scholars, the central question of women's consent and even on a circumscribed basis, participation in the decision to engage in this long-term intensive Torah study. We're going to be looking at Masachet Ketubot's 5th chapter, and I just want to set the stage with a little bit of context from the Mishnayot leading up to the one that is under discussion in our sugya. Several Mishnayot in this chapter deal with a husband and a wife's respective labor and its effect on the marital relationship. We see a situation where the husband is makdish, where the husband dedicates to the temple the fruits of his wife's labor or her earnings. We see a situation where the husband is madir. He takes an oath about what may be done with the fruits of his wife's labor or even with sexual enjoyment. And what we see the rabbis working out through these Mishnayot is the limits on particularly the husband's unilateral discretion vis-a-vis his wife's income, her work, but also a larger question about within a marriage, who has what prerogatives. So our Mishnah, the 6th Mishnah, speaks about the husband's sexual obligations to his wife. And before we go into it in depth, I will say that it's a kind of transitional Mishnah from what I just described, this working out of prerogatives, to a state of all-out conjugal war and breakdown that takes place in the 7th Mishnah that brings up the case of the mored or the moredet, the rebellious spouse. So looking closely at that 6th Mishnah, we're going to see relationships pushed to their limit. We're going to talk about non-consensual situations. And these, after all, non-consensual situations are the province of the law. That's where we need the law to come in and tell us when people can't agree what needs to happen. So now opening our Gemarot to page 61b, Samech Aleph Amud Bet, we read the Mishnah that occurs in the wide lines of the page. Hamadir et ishto mitashmish hamita, Beit Shammai omrim shtei Shabbatot, Beit Hillel omrim Shabbat echat. So the first situation that's discussed is a man who prohibits enjoyment of the sexual act for his wife. How long can that very suboptimal situation be sustained? And the rabbis quickly come to the realization that the man can't take this away from his wife. It is her right to have sexual satisfaction from her husband. And so what really must be under discussion is the man taking an oath that he will not benefit from his wife sexually, because he doesn't have the power at all to circumscribe her enjoyment in theory. But what he can do is functionally circumscribe each of their enjoyment from each other, because if there isn't consent for the sexual act, then the rabbis assume it's not happening, at least not properly under the law. And so the first discussion is between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. Beit Shammai is willing to allow for 2 weeks of this very unnatural marital situation where the husband has actually taken a formal oath that there not be sexual congress between them. And Beit Hillel says, no, this really can't be sustained beyond a week. We'll give it a week, but if they haven't worked it out by then we need to, that's going to trigger the mechanisms whereby the marriage will be formally dissolved. HaTalmidim yotz'in leTalmud Torah shelo birshut. But wait a minute, we have all kinds of situations where the couple are functionally abstinent for longer than a week and even longer than 2 weeks, because the Mishnah goes on to say that students, scholars, Talmidim, can go out to study the Torah, presumably far away from home, shelo birshut, without their wives' consent, without anybody's permission, shloshim yom, for 30 days, for an entire month. So that would seem to give the lie to the idea that a situation of abstinence cannot be stretched on beyond a week or two. Hapoalim Shabbat echat, but workers can only go for 1 week without giving their wives sexual satisfaction. And then the Mishnah raises the question, well, what is the onah, the regular interval for sexual activity that is specified by the Torah itself? The Mishnah asks, ha'onah ha'amura b'Torah. So what is the, or maybe it's not a question, maybe it's a statement, that the following is going to be the interval for sexual congress that is specified in the Torah. Hatayalin b'chol yom, hapoalim shtayim b'Shabbat, hachamarim achat b'Shabbat, hagamalim achat l'shloshim yom, hasapanim achat l'shisha chodashim. So then the Mishnah gives us a rundown of sexual obligations that are based on a man's occupation, which presumably takes into account his availability to be at home, as well as the extent to which his labor is physically taxing, what kind of energy he's going to have left at the end of the day. So just to go back over that in English, so the tayalin, now this is a really problematic and interesting term. It presumably has to do with mobility, with walking around, with men of leisure. The way that I like to think of it is to get out my Baudelaire and think about the flaneur, the figure who liked to just walk around Paris kind of idly with nothing particular he had to get done in a day. So that's how I think of the tayal. So he has to satisfy his wife daily. A common worker, a common laborer, twice a week. A donkey driver has to report for sexual duty once a week. A camel driver who presumably goes for longer voyages with a caravan through the desert has to report for duty once every 30 days, once a month. And a sailor, a sapan, has to come back and connect with his wife and satisfy her sexual obligations once every 6 months. And then, very importantly, the Mishnah concludes with the phrase, Divrei Rabbi Eliezer, that these are the words of Rabbi Eliezer. So I want to just mention some of the significance of that citation that comes at the end and talk a little bit about the rabbinic culture of citation. So as is commonly known, the rabbis are really passionate about citing sources, transmitting ideas in the names of the people who said them. But in converse, or perhaps in complementary fashion, the way that rabbinic citation works is that the more anonymity a source has, the more authority it has. So if it is said in the name of somebody specifically, it's almost like the rabbis are hedging their bets so that you can come along later and say, okay, but that was Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. This might be tied to the difference between an oral culture of memorization and a written or print culture, so that in an oral culture, you have to memorize anything that is going to be transmitted, and you kind of throw it all into the hopper of your memory, but then you just memorize deviations from what is commonly agreed upon as a kind of line item that's granted to this thinker or that thinker. Whereas in a written culture, we have a lot of room, so to speak, and we can afford to record each and every idea in the name of the person who said it. And so ideas take on more authority when they are linked to specific names. So just remember that that is the codified Mishnah that I read to you, but it's also said specifically in the name of Rabbi Eliezer. That's going to come back later. So now I would like to jump a little bit, and we're going to skim over a little bit of the legalistic discussion of this Mishnah. The Gemara starts by talking about how Hillel and Shammai arrive at their respective terms of 1 week for Hillel and 2 weeks for Beit Shammai, for how long a husband can be madir, can prohibit through an oath the sexual enjoyment. But I want you to notice how the Agadah, the narrative pieces that we're going to talk about, are really embedded in a discussion of Jewish law. So we're going to look at one micro moment in that legal discussion, and this is at the very bottom of the same page where we have our Mishnah, 61b, and it's going to be on the last line, the last few words on this daf, on this page. Birshut Kama. So the Mishnah says that scholars may go without permission, without consent, for a month. But what if they have consent, Birshut? So then how long can they go and study Torah in distant locales? Kama dabai. However long they want, right? If they have permission, then it can be any length of time, presumably. And then the Gemara says, Orcha de milta kama. But really, what is the way of it? And there's a very revealing Rashi that I would like us to look at on the top of the next page, on 62a. Rashi glosses Orcha de milta, the way of the thing. He says, derech eretz, the ways of respect. What the Gemara is trying to get at here is respectful behavior. Shelo yisa alav chet, so that the husband doesn't bring sin upon himself. Va'afilu hu yachol lefatota shetiten lo reshut, even if he's able to, and I'm going to translate this as persuade her, even if he's able to persuade her so that she formally gives permission. Maybe not everything that a couple is willing to consent to is actually healthy or should actually be done. What is the length of time that's really appropriate for a husband to go off and study Torah, even with his wife's backing? And then there's a discussion of various approaches to how you might divide your time. You might have a scholar who's home for a month and goes away for a month. You might have a scholar who goes away for a month to learn, but then stays home for 2 months to restore the relationship and to try to counteract some of the negative effects. So there's a fairly involved discussion of the timing. And then we come to the material on 62b, if you turn the page, the material that I would like to focus on today. And this is going to be the bulk of our discussion. It's going to be a series of stories about husbands who go away to study. So we start with reference again to the Mishnah, this time to the end of the Mishnah, because in this intervening daf that we didn't read together, the Gemara really goes occupation by occupation and tries to work out well, what are the effects of a husband who works at X or Y on the conjugal relationship? And now finally we get to the end of the Mishnah that talked about the sailors. And I am on the 5th line of the Gemara on 62b. Hasapanim achat l'shisha chodashim. So once every 6 months, they have to come back and report for conjugal duty, divrei Rabbi Eliezer. And that is, as we said, according to Rabbi Eliezer. Amar Mar Bruna, Amar Rav, halacha ka Rabbi Eliezer. Amar Rav Adabar Ahava, Amar Rav, zo divrei Rabbi Eliezer, aval chachamim omrim, hatalmidim yotzin letalmud Torah, shtayim o shalosh shanim shalo birshut. So that position of 1 month without permission was according to Rabbi Eliezer, but in fact, we have Tanaitic material citing the earlier sages, the Tanaim, that says that scholars may go for 2 and 3 years without the permission of their wives. They can just make a unilateral decision. Bye, honey, I'm going off to yeshiva for a couple of years. Amar Rava, Samchu Rabbanan Adarav Adabar Ahava. So Rava clarifies that these rabbis were relying on the position that's just been cited of Adabar Ahava, who gives this 2 to 3 year position. Ve'avdi uvda benafshayahu. Now, how to translate this is very interesting. The plain sense of avdi uvda benafshayahu is they did this themselves. They in fact had the practice of going off for relatively long periods of years, and that's what they did. Now, Rashi has a somewhat tendentious translation of benafshayahu, the word that we could translate into Hebrew as be'atzmam, regarding themselves. Rashi translates in a little more pointed way. Vehu ba lahem litol mehem nefashot, shene'enshim umetim. So this language is coming to say that their nefashot, their lives, were taken from them, shene'enshim, that they were punished, umetim, and that they died as a result of this practice of going away from their wives for long periods to study Torah. And then the Gemara brings Exhibit A, the sad case of Rav Rachume. So now we are off to the races with our first story of what not to do when you want to have an intensive study of Torah experience. I'll read and translate the story of Rav Rachume. Ki hada Rav Rachume, like the case of Rav Rachume, hava shachiach kamei de Rava b'Machoza. He made a practice of studying with Rava in the town of Machoza. Who hava ragil de hava ate levete kol male yoma de Kippurei. He would come home once a year on Erev Yom Kippur. This is not a great time to choose for a conjugal visit because, of course, relations are forbidden on the night of Yom Kippur. But that's when he came. I presume that he stayed for longer than he wasn't popping in for the day. He was making a relatively long journey, and he was going to stay for Bein Hazmanim, maybe stay through Sukkot, and then go back to the yeshiva in time for a new semester after the holidays. Yom Echad Meshachte Shmata. One day, the sugya pulled him. He was attracted by what he was learning. Now, I have to tell you that I decided to call this shiur Holding the Book, and I'll explain why later on. But the other name that I was definitely considering was Meshachte Shmata, that the sugya pulled him to it. And it's fascinating language because it suggests a kind of attraction, a kind of fascination, and a kind of engagement that rivals the claims of domesticity and not just of the domestic, but even of the conjugal. Hava Mesachia Dveitu. So his wife was looking out for him. Mesachia, she was tzofat in Hebrew, we would say. She was looking like in a concentrated way. Hashta'ate, hashta'ate. And we get language in her voice saying, now he's coming, any moment now, he must be coming. Lo ata, he didn't come. Chalash data, achet dimata me'ina. She grew upset and a tear fell from her eyes. And now we split the screen. This would be a great thing to represent cinematically. So we have the language of achet, of the tear falling from her eye. And now we split the screen and we go back to Rav Achume, who after all, she thinks he's lying in a ditch somewhere. He's just sitting there learning this fascinating sugya. Hava yatev be'igra. So he was sitting on the roof, as people did to keep cool in the ancient Near East. Afchet igra. The roof fell down. The roof collapsed. Mitute, from under him. So her tear falls, the roof falls with perhaps near simultaneity, venach nafshe, and he died. And so she is left a widow. And it's a tragic story all around. Presumably she knew what she was in for. She was okay with this arrangement whereby he came home yearly. There's no specification about whether she gave active consent or whether it was simply the passive consent of this is what he did and she went along with it. She did not ask to be divorced from him. But it turned out terribly because here's a Torah scholar who dies in the prime of his life, and he leaves a widow behind him and perhaps children. So that's our first story. And then the Gemara steps back and it asks, okay, so we get that that's bad. That's not the way it's supposed to work. How should it work? Ona shel talmidei chachamim emat. How often is the proper interval for conjugal visits for scholars? Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, me'erev Shabbat le'erev Shabbat. Ideally, it would be every Friday night. It would be weekly, and it would be at a time that's not only permissible to have conjugal relations, but where it's a time when it's praiseworthy to do so, namely on Friday night. And then we have a verse from Tehillim, adduced as a proof text, Asher Piryo Yiten Be'ito, that the scholar will be fruitful, presumably through siring children, if he gives of himself in the proper time, at Be'ito, when the Ona falls, namely on Friday nights. Amari Rav Yehuda, V'itema Rav Huna. So we have a tradition that Rav Huna said, and maybe according to others, Rav Huna said this, V'itema Rav Nachman, and some others have the tradition that Rav Nachman said it. HaMeshamesh mitato me'erev Shabbat le'erev Shabbat, Yehuda berei de Rabbi Chia, Chatenei de Rabbi Yanai, Hava Azil v'yatev bevei Rav. So, speaking of people who have relations with their wives every Friday night, we are going to tell you a story. It's actually a terrible story and a little bit of a diversion from what we're talking about. But we have this next tradition. Amar Rabbi Yehuda ve'itema Rabbi Huna ve'itema Rabbi Nachman. So it's possible that all of these different people said this. Ve'hameshamesh mitato me'erev Shabbat le'erev Shabbat. Yehuda berei de Rabbi Chia, Chatanei de Rabbi Yanai. So this is the story of a scholar who does come home and make conjugal visits every Friday night. And he is the son of Rabbi Chia, and he is the son-in-law of Rabbi Yanai. Hava azel v'yatev bevei Rav, v'chol be'shimshe hava ate levete. So he would go to yeshiva all week, And then at the last possible moment, Bein Hashmashot, when dusk was already falling, he would come home every Shabbat to his house. I take it that he was not the one putting up the cholent. And when he came, his father-in-law, could see, or we could translate, there could be seen before him a column of fire. There was this kind of supernatural sign that this great scholar was on his way home to do his proper conjugal duty by his wife. Yom Echad, Meshachte Shmata. So one day the sugya pulled him and intrigued him, and he didn't go home on time for Shabbat. Kevan delo chaze hahu simana, since he didn't see that usual sign, Rabbi Yanai, his father-in-law, said, Amar lahu Rabbi Yanai, kfu mitato, turn over his mattress. If they were in mourning, if they were in the early stages of mourning before the funeral, this is one of the practices that they would have conducted. They would have turned over his mattress. She'il male Yehuda kayam lo bitel onato, because I know my son-in-law, and if he were alive, he would not have missed his appointed time to be with his wife, my daughter. Havai kishgaga sheyotze milifnei hashalit. And this was just one of those cases, like the verse in Kohelet describes when it says that it's like something that happens by accident that comes out from a powerful person, that a powerful person, a major scholar, like Rabbi Yanai, even by saying something wrong, saying something accidental, has the ability to alter reality. V'nach nafshe. And he actually died, meaning the son-in-law who is supposed to be coming home, who is detained by his learning, he actually died as a result of his father-in-law's presumption that he had died. So this also sounds like a pretty terrible story. Here's somebody who does it right, comes home every Friday night. It's a manageable impact for his family in the ancient world. And one time he gets it wrong. He doesn't show up and he dies as a result of it. So we're going to try to watch the trend line of these stories and see what direction they're moving in. We had Rav Rechume, who goes away for a year at a time, and his wife is left in sorrow when she doesn't see him. He dies as a result under kind of supernatural, mysterious circumstances. Same now with the case that we just read about. His death is a little bit mysterious. Now we're going to see a third story and see if we can spot the trend. So now we have a little bit of a digression that we're going to jump over about Rebbe's efforts to marry off his son to an appropriate bride. So we're going to jump down a couple of lines to Azel Yasak Le Lebre Be Rabbi Yosef ben Zimra. He went and he tried to marry his daughter off in the household, to marry his son off, pardon me, with the daughter of, in the household of Rabbi Yosef ben Zimra. Pasku le tartes reishnin lemezal bevei Rav. And as part of the negotiations for the marriage contract, they apportioned him 12 years to go study in yeshiva before his responsibilities as a husband would kick in. That right away, he was going to be what we call in Yiddish, affenkest, that he was going to be studying at the expense of his father-in-law for a set period of time, and the time was set as 12 years, which is a really long time. Achlefua kameh. They passed the bride in front of him. He got to catch a glimpse of the bride, of Rabbi Yosef ben Zimra's daughter. Amar lahu ninhu shichnin. So he said to Nihavu shichnin. He said to them, let it be 6 years instead. I'm willing to knock it down from 12 years to 6 years because I really wouldn't mind having my conjugal duties kick in with this woman. Achlefua kameh. So they passed her before him again. Amar lahu ichnis v'hadar ezel. You know what? Let me consummate the marriage with her, and then I'll go to yeshiva. Hava kamachzif me'avu. But having said something so earthy, he was a little bit embarrassed before his father. Amar le bani dat kun chayesh b'cha. So his father comforted him and said to him, you know what, my son, the will or even the mindset of your creator is evident within you. You are walking in the ways of the divine here. Let me explain why. Me'ikara ketiv tivi emo v'tita emo. So first in Shmot Tet Zayin, it says that I will bring them into the land and then I will plant them, meaning that God's original intention is to bring Bnei Israel into the land of Israel and then to have them build the temple. Ulevasof ktiv va'asu li mikdash v'shachanti betocham. But then later on in Shmot, in Kaf Hey, it says, make me a mikdash, a holy place, and I will dwell among them. In other words, there's going to be this temporary mishkan because God, in God's love for the Jewish people, cannot wait to consummate the relationship, as it were. Avel yetev tartes reishne. So as it was, he consummated the marriage, and then he went and he learned for 12 years bevei Rav in the yeshiva. Ad de'ata I akra devetu. By the time he came back, his wife was barren or infertile. She no longer had the fertility of a young woman, which is really tragic. Their family life never got off the ground because of this decision to go and study for a long period. Amar Rabbi, so then the young man, who's no longer such a young man, his father says, Hechi naved. What should we do? Negarsha, yomru, aniyazo lashav shimra. If he divorces her, actually, it's a little yuckier than that. He says, if we divorce her, because it's very much a sort of patriarchal decision-making process. But if we divorce her, then people are going to say, this poor woman, she waited for him in vain. Ninasiv itata achriti. He could simply marry a second additional wife. Yomru zo ishto v'zo zonato. But then people will say that wife, presumably the younger wife chosen for her intact fertility, she's his real wife, and that other one is his harlot or side person, we can say delicately. Ba'ela rachme v'itasyat. So he, presumably the father-in-law, that's the way it's often translated, although it's not exactly clear who does the praying, somebody, one of these men who has benefited from this system of long, intensive Torah study, one of these men prays for her and she is healed or she is cured of her infertility, and presumably they're able to start their family. So we have a dire consequence, but in this case, it's able to be reversed. Now we come to the emotional heart of this material, the next two stories. Rabbi Hanania ben Chachinai have a ka'azel levei Rav b'shilhei hilula de Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. So Rabbi Hanania ben Hachinai was on his way to start his studies at the yeshiva toward the end of the wedding week, the Sheva Brachot of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. Amar le Iakavli, the groom said to him, wait for me. Da'ati bahadach, and I'll go together with you. But so great was Hanania ben Hachinai's eagerness to get there and start his learning that he did not wait. He stayed in yeshiva for 12 years. Yativ tres reishne bevei rav. Ad de'ate ishtanu shvilei demata. By the time he got home, they had changed around all of the streets. He didn't even know how to find his house. Lo yada lamezal levete. Azal yativ aguda denahara. So he went and he sat on the riverbank and he had himself a think. Shama lahahi ravita dahavu karule bat hachinai mali kultech v'tanezel. So as he was sitting there, he saw a girl and he heard her friends calling out to her, daughter of Hachinai, fill up your pitcher and let's go. Now remember, he is Hanania ben Hachinai. So Hachinai is the girl's grandfather. And she seems to be called after him. Perhaps because it was her grandfather who was actually raising her day to day during her father's absence, or perhaps because this is just the way that the family was known. Amar, Shmamina, Hi Ravita Didan. So he said, and I think this is a little bit of rabbinic humor because he said, Shmamina, we can learn from this that girl is ours. That's my daughter. Azal Batra. So he followed her home. Hava Yativa Dvetu Kanahala Kimcha. His wife was sitting there sifting flour, very day-to-day domestic responsibility when he got home. Dal Ina, she lifted up her eyes. Chazite, Save Liba. She saw him and her heart saw him. Her heart rejoiced. Her heart burst. There are lots of ways to translate Save Liba, but the end result was Parach Rucha. She fainted, or possibly she gave the appearance of dying. Amar lefanav. So he, her husband, says to God, Ribono shel olam, master of the universe. And this is the formulation that people use for strong, even chutzpahdik advocacy vis-a-vis the divine. Ribono shel olam, aniya zo, zeschara, this poor woman. This is her reward for all of the time that she waited for me and kept the household going. Ba'a rachamei Allah v'chaya. He begged for mercy for her, and indeed she lived. So this one has a happy ending. So that is Ben Hachinai. He realizes that he can follow his daughter home, but even if he can find the way home, it's complicated to go home again. His wife, on the one hand, has been waiting for him, but her waiting has taken on the cast of waiting for something that's never going to happen, for his return. And when it does happen, she seems to die at first. So we can learn from this. Not only we can learn from this, but even his fellow Talmudic scholars could learn from this. Rabbi Chama bar Bisa, Azel Yatev Tres Reishne. So Rabbi Chama bar Bisa goes and he studies for 12 years in the yeshiva, Bavei Midrasha. Ki ata, when he came home, when it was time to come home, Amar lo iavid keda avid ben Chachinai. I'm not going to do as Ben Hachinai did. I'm not going to repeat that mistake. Ayel yatev b'midrasha shalach leveitei. So he went to his hometown. He sat in the Beit Midrash and he sent word to his home that he was on his way. Ata Rabbi Oshaya Berei. Meanwhile, in the Beit Midrash, in walks this strapping lad, Rabbi Oshaya, that he doesn't even recognize as his son. Yativ Kmei, he sat down before him. Hava kamash ilei shmata. And they had a Talmudic discussion. They asked Talmudic questions of each other, maybe even some difficult gotcha type questions. Chaza dekamitchadede shmate, and he saw that this young man was sharp as a tack in his learning. Chalash date, he grew upset, wistful. We don't always have the richest vocabulary in Talmudic literature for complicated emotional states, but he seems to be in one. Amar I havai hacha havali zera kihai. If I had been here, if only I had stayed home and raised my family and taught my children, then I could have a son like this. And with that thought, he got up to return to his house. Al levete, al bray. So he walks into the house, then in comes his son. Kam kame. So he stood up before this genius, this sage of a young man. He thought that the young man had come to ask him more questions. Hu savar lamash ile shmatata kabai. Amra le dvetu. And then his wife says, I think with a little bit of a wink, his wife says, Mi'ika abba dekaim kame bra? Have you ever heard of a father who stood up to honor his son? So that is when and how he finds out that this accomplished young man is actually his son. Karya le Rami Bar Chama. So Rami Bar Chama says regarding this situation and this family, the verse from Kohelet, Hachut HaMashulash lo bimhera yinatek, that the cord with three ribbons or three bands to it will not be easily broken. Ze Rabbi Oshaya, beno shel Rabbi Chama, Barbisa. It's these three generations and the way that they have transmitted their learning, even in absentia, that has created this familial strength in Torah. So now we really see a shift from tragic stories to in which people become infertile and people die, the husband dies, the wife dies, to essentially a comic story where everything turns out well in the end, even though there is this really wistful moment of his thinking, if I had been here, then I could have had a child like this. But as an overall trend, what we're seeing in this succession of stories is, on the one hand, increasing amounts of time that husbands are spending away from their families, but on the other hand, increasing levels of wifely consent and even initiative. Before we move on to the final story that we're going to have time to consider today, the story of Rabbi Akiva and Rachel, I want to point out that the whole, if I had been there, and then the son does turn out to be the Talmid Chacham, that is just as much of a miraculous deus ex machina moment. It's just as much of a save against the odds as the resurrection of a dead spouse or the restoration of lost fertility. If things were operating according to normal natural law, then this son who had grown up without his father would not necessarily have his father's learning, would not be heir to that. But in each of these situations, there is a kind of miraculous save that comes in. So finally, I want to move on to a case where the wife not only gives enthusiastic consent, but she is actually the one who initiates her husband's Torah study, even though that's going to entail a long absence. Rabbi Akiva Raya de ben Kalba Savua Hava. So Rabbi Akiva was a shepherd in the employ of ben Kalba Savua. Chazite Brate, his daughter, ben Kalba Savua, the employer's daughter, saw that he was tzania umale, he was modest or humble, and he was virtuous. Amrale, she said to him, I mikdash nalach azlat lebeirav, if I become betrothed to you. And this is interesting because a very famous issue in the study of Masechet Kiddushin is the unilateral nature of the betrothal declaration, whereby the husband can betroth the wife. But here she's using the reflexive form of this verb, and she's taking the initiative. She's the strong actor who says, if I betroth myself to you, then will you go and study in the yeshiva? And he says, yes, in Ikat Shalei Betzina. So she becomes betrothed to him in secret because her father does not approve of the match. They have a difference in class, a difference in wealth. Vishadrate, and she sends him away to study. Shema Avu, Afka mi beite, Adra hana'a minichse. So her father hears about her secret engagement and he kicks her out of home, and he now back to the issue of oaths and making oaths, forbidding people from benefits. He forbids her to enjoy any of the benefits of his property, even though he's a wealthy man. It's a way of punishing her. Meanwhile, Rabbi Akiva, Azel v'yatev treis reishnin b'vei Rav. He goes off to the yeshiva for 12 years. Ki ata aiti bahadadia treis re alfei talmidei. When he comes back, it is with 12,000 disciples who have become students of his Torah. Shamei lahu saba de ka'amar la ad kama kamadabrat almanut chayim. Now we've moved on to daf 63a. So he hears, really Rabbi Akiva overhears when he comes back to town, a certain older gentleman, a Saba, talking to his wife Rachel, saying, how long are you going to go on with this living widowhood, of living without your husband, living in poverty because your father has forbidden you all of his wealth? Amrale, she said to this random old man that she was talking to, if he were listening to me, he would learn, he would stay there, he would go back and learn for another 12 years. Amar, so Rabbi Akiva said to himself, without ever having a conversation directly with Rachel, he said to himself, Birshut Kavidna, I'm acting with her consent. Hadar, Azil, V'yatev Treis Reishnei. So he went back for another 12 years. Treis Shnei Achrini, B'vei Rav. Ki ata, Aiti Behedya, Esrin Va'arba Alfei Talmidei. So this time he comes back after the second 12-year period with 24,000 disciples to show for his labors. Shama Devetu, Hava Kanafka La'ape. His wife heard that he was in town, so she went out to greet him. Amrula Shivavata, She'ili Mane Levush Ve'ikasai. So the neighbor women say to her, and there are always catty neighbors in the Talmud. One of the classes of difficult people in the Talmud is the Shivavata, these gossipy neighbors. And they say to her, for God's sake, get yourself dressed, put on something decent. So she has quite the retort to them. She says, a tzaddik, a righteous man, knows the soul or knows the being of his beast. I have been akin to a beast, meaning through my labor, I have enabled my husband's productivity, his productivity in Torah, and he is going to know who I am, even if I'm in tatters. He's going to recognize me. Kimatya legabe, when she approached him, nafla alapa, she fell on her face as a sign of respect. Kamanashka le lechar'e, and she began to kiss his feet. Havu kamar chafela shma'e, so his bodyguards started pushing her away. Amar lahu shivkua, he said to them, let her be. Shali v'shalachem shalahu, what is mine And what is yours? The Torah that we think we possess, that we think we earn fair and square. Guess what? We didn't build that. It belongs to her. Meanwhile, split screen. Shama avu da'ata gavra rabba lamata. Meanwhile, her father heard that a great scholar had come to town. Amar eze legabe efshar de mafer nidrai. I'm going to go see him because maybe he can nullify this crazy vow that I made 24 years ago that I'm really regretting because it's really interfered with my relationship with my daughter and with my family life. Maybe a great scholar can get me out of it. Ata legabe, so he went to see him to have an audience. Amar le, Rabbi Akiva said to him, Adata de gavra rava minadrat. When you made the vow, were you thinking that he might become a great scholar? Would you still have made the vow if you knew that he would become a great scholar, this man that your daughter wanted to marry? Amar le, afilu perek echad va'afilu halacha achat. And Kalba Savua said to him, if I had known that he would be capable of studying even one chapter or even one halacha, I never would have made that silly vow. Amar le, so Rabbi Akiva says to him, Anahu, I am he. I am the one that your daughter married. Nafal ala pei uneshake al kar'eh. So then he had the same reaction as his daughter. He fell down upon his face and he kissed Rabbi Akiva's feet. V'yahevle palga mimamone. And he gave him half of his wealth. And this is considered so meritorious that Rabbi Akiva and Rachel's daughter did the same thing. They did the same sort of talent scouting and promotion for Ben Azai. And the rabbis applied the phrase to her, Rachela Batar Rachela Azla, that one sheep or one lamb follows another. The name Rachel means sheep or lamb, and so the daughter of Rachel follows the mother. So this is definitely a happy ending. It's not the ending. There's a seventh story that we're not going to read today that is incredibly vexed, also about a scholar who goes off to study for a long time. We want so badly for this to be the happy ending, for this to be the triumphant story of, you see, if there's enough consent and enough participation and buy-in from the family, then there are really no adverse consequences and everybody's fine. But I don't think that the rabbis really believe that. I think the positioning of this story as part of this suite of stories that has a really ambiguous set of outcomes. Yes, in broad terms, it moves from the tragic to the near comic. But some really terrible things happen in the life of families. Now, we have to recognize that marriage at that time in the ancient Near East and in the rabbinic period, marriage was not companionate. It was fundamentally a more transactional kind of an arrangement than it is today. We still feel meshach shmata, the pull of the sugyot. But I would like to suggest that now that marriage is companionate and women learn, that we preserve that same degree of net passion, that sense of meshach shmata, but we create a more balanced distribution of that passion so that there's a greater balance between a life of learning and family life. There's a greater balance between men and women, who in some cases will be husbands and wives, and in other cases will simply be men and women. And that we have a more universal and democratic experience of meshach shmata. So what I ended up calling this shiur, today's shiur, is Holding the Book. And I'll tell you how the title evolved. I was teaching some of this material as I usually do, in a more discussion-driven, interactive setting. And somebody came up to me after the talk and she said, you know, I can kind of relate to this whole situation, even though my family isn't very observant and we don't engage in a lot of Torah study. But when my husband was going to medical school in the 50s, all of the wives had to keep the world on our shoulders in order to get our husbands through medical school. And this was referred to as holding the book, that you would hold the book up while your husband studied. And I can relate to these women who are sitting at home holding the book. Now, after that, I thought, okay, the next time I teach this, I'm going to call it dropping the book, because I feel like this is about a series of situations where the holding of the book doesn't work and terrible things happen. But what I would like to offer today is a more hopeful notion of holding the book, where men and women are really holding these books together. And I'd like to close with an idea of holding the book in our own hands, as it was articulated by one of my favorite scholars, Adam Zachary Newton, who happens to be my husband, who holds the book for me and for whom I feel privileged to hold the book. He wrote a book called To Make the Hands Impure, and it's about what it means to hold a book in our hands, and the idea that this is not a neutral encounter, that when you hold a book, the experience of holding it, the experience of reading it, and of becoming accountable to what's written in it, both maculates us and elevates us. And so I don't need these stories about long-term Torah study to be perfect. I don't need them to have happy endings. I want to come and grapple truly with the difficulties that they present. And that is the sense of maculation and being impinged upon and even a little bit dirtied by the book in our hands. But I also want us to see the potential for holding the book together and being elevated by that book. And so I'm hoping that this International Women's Talmud Day has been a good occasion for seeing the potential of holding on to these books together and learning from them. And I thank you for your time and attention.